there was a report that was done by Blue Wolf, which is a Salesforce consulting company, called the State of Salesforce report, um, just put out last year. And this is their annual analysis of how the best companies use Salesforce. And it's all based on data that was collected by MIT Sloan School of Management, MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And they interviewed hundreds of companies, various sizes, about how they use Salesforce and so forth. Very in-depth report. And I have that available. I'm going to make it available to anyone who emails us at the conclusion of the webinar so that you can see the full report. But one of the things that caught my eye when I read it was um, there was one question asked, what keeps you awake at night? And interestingly enough, um, this came into four basic categories, and they were ranked this way. Number one was people, and this is obviously a concern, getting the best people, best skills, and so forth, hiring the right people. Number two was data and reducing bad data, data security and compliance, and being able to trust data. And then three and four were revenue. You would think that revenue would be at the top of any company to stay in business and so forth. And then number four was technology, integrating systems, budget allocation, ensuring security, et cetera. So data is one of the major concerns of all companies. And if that's the case, especially in the digital age, then more and more we rely on data to make business decisions about the direction a company is going to go. If you don't have good data, then that those decisions are somehow compromised. So we're going to talk about bad data. And what is bad data? Um, it's data where there's no entry standards. In other words, um, you you have a database that everyone can work on, but everybody has their own ideas on how to enter data. There's no data standard or data entry standards. It's data where there's just incomplete data. Records have maybe no email addresses, or they don't have complete billing addresses, or there's inconsistencies, or you have misspellings, um, abbreviations, or punctuation. We're going to address all these and how they contribute to bad data and what you can do to um, remedy those issues. And all those issues will have a real life cause or a real life cost. Um, Before I came to Kyazma, I worked 14 years with the state of Utah. And in our database, we had, let's say, 25,000 mailings that we used to do. This is before we started using Salesforce. Invariably, we would get 30% of those returned for bad formatting. That was, usually something having to do with address formatting, because the US Postal Service has very specific ways of formatting their addresses. And if you don't follow those, then the machines will spit them out. So we would get a third of those back, let's say 7,500 at 40 cents per item. That's $3,000 for that one mailing. And if we do 6 mailings a year, that translates to $18,000 a year of waste. Once we started using Salesforce and enforcing good data standards, in a number of different ways, that 30% return went down to under 10%. So it was a huge cost savings for the state, for the taxpayers of the state. In the private sector, you can expect those numbers to be a lot higher. Now, obviously, in this day and age, we do a lot more email blasts and automated marketing and that kind of thing. But even then, you have costs associated with that. So at the conclusion of the webinar, I will offer my notes and some other documents, naming conventions, plus the U.S. Postal Service guidelines, plus the Blue Wolf report, state of Salesforce. If you email events@kyazmallc.com, you'll get these takeaway documents, and you can be on your way to implementing some clean data for your organization. So what I'm going to do is hopefully show you some things that you can do to enforce clean data, and how you can remedy the bad data that might exist in your organization already. So how do you know if you have bad data? Well, when you do a search in Salesforce, you'll find duplicates maybe that show up. And the duplicates are based on any text field that are part of your records. So if you're looking up an account, let's say American, it's going to search all of the text fields within an account, any record, and bring up those results. So if you have, American Appliance, American Wholesale Club, and you have any kind of punctuation in there, let's say American Appliance Corporation and American Appliance Corp, C-O-R-P, period. Those are both the same company, and you're going to have duplicates. So enforcing a data entry standard will help alleviate the duplicates that are created. Now, we look at technology and think, we don't have confidence in this particular database or that particular database because we know that there's bad data or whatever. We're embarrassed by the data, or worse yet, we don't fully trust it to support decision making or whatever. A lot of times this means that there's incomplete reporting, and it might be data that is not supported by any kind of collateral documentation that we might have. So a lot of times we're too quick to blame the technology when in fact it's the people who are using the technology who are to blame or at fault in entering the bad data. Now, one of the things that can be done is simply to have kind of an oversight committee or a steering committee that is responsible for enforcing certain data standards and in reviewing those standards on a regular basis so that it's drummed into employees that this is how we're going to do data entry. We're going to follow these guidelines, have it be part of your company policies and procedures, have the documentation readily available in multiple places, have it be part of new employee orientation, so on and so forth. That's kind of a beginning point for enforcing good data standards. So the next thing that you can do is just to create a report or a dashboard in Salesforce that will filter on certain fields that you need. Now, I uploaded some contacts. This is just an org that doesn't have any real significance. It's just a test org. What I'm going to do is I'm interested in the records that don't have any email addresses, so I'm going to take some of these out just for the demo. And let's see, I think I took that one out. And the email addresses obviously are going to be important because when you do email blasts, you want that information. So I'm going to create a report, and I'm going to look at accounts and contacts and create that report. And when you create a report in Salesforce, it will take some of the fields and assume that you want those fields. So I'm going to take some of these out. Now, you notice that there's no mailing country available here. We're going to actually add that a little later in the demo, but I'm going to take some of these fields out that we don't really need because I'm mostly focusing on the email and let's see, the rest we can probably keep, but we don't need the titles nor the salutation. Okay, so this email address, I'm going to move over here because I want to be able to focus on that. So I'm going to show all the contacts, but I'm going to add a filter. And what I want to filter on is the email address. So where the email is equal to nothing. In other words, where there is no email address. And you can see that I've got two records here, and I can run the report and so forth. So having a report or a dashboard on your and again, you can run the report regularly. You can schedule future runs of report to come to your email once a week if you want to see how many records don't have a particular value in a field that you're interested in, like email or whatever. So that's probably the quickest way to identify bad data is to create a report. And you saw how quickly I was able to do that in Salesforce. And so I would just save that as records without email. Okay. And then I can also use this as a basis for a dashboard. And I'm not going to go into that because just out of time, I want to focus on some other things. But you can create a dashboard that you can put on your homepage where you can see that information. Again, you can. I'm just focusing on contacts and accounts, but you can do this for any record in any of the objects that are available in your database. So what if you don't have the email addresses? What can you do? Well, sometimes it takes a little time to hunt those down. Obviously, it would be easier if they would do it automatically. There is a feature that is not very well known in Salesforce, and it's called the request update. And the request update, what it does, it sends an automated form to whoever the contact is, in this case, this fictitious person. And if you click, obviously this is not going to work with those who don't have email addresses, but it will to update their phone number and address and title and so forth for those who do have email addresses. For those who don't, obviously you can call them up and say, hey, how are things going? We're lacking your email address, or it bounced back. Can we have an updated one? You can also look online. There are numerous services that will offer that information for simply looking up, that person in a particular organization or whatever. Sometimes if they have their website available, you can just look them up on their website. This one doesn't have a website, but if you were to look them up on the internet, there might be a staff list with email addresses, and you can get it from there. In other words, there's a little bit of sleuthing that has to go on in order to get some of the information. Now, all this does take time, but if you're doing it as you go, then everyone contributes to the betterment of the database and the quality of the data. So, setting up data cleanliness dashboards and reports is a good start to know where you are at as far as your data goes. You can also download from the App Exchange. There are numerous packages, and a lot of them are free on the App Exchange. All you do is go up to your apps here, and there's the App Exchange link here, and it'll open up a new tab. But if you type in data clean or something like that, first of all, you can get an add-on to Salesforce called data.com. It's usually fairly pricey. They have different plans, and I'm not going to get into detail as far as that goes, but it has millions of records that you can look up that are based on information from the company. Sometimes it's 3 or 6 months dated. In the nonprofit and public sector, it's usually a year dated, sometimes a few years dated. So it just depends on what sector you're in. In the private sector, they get the information from Duns and Bradstreet, which is usually fairly up to date. Plus, they have a clean component to it, so it'll help keep your data clean. But there's also other things that can help with your data cleanliness, and there are some. Let's see. I'm going to go off screen here to another screen. This one's called the data quality analysis dashboards, and you can't see this very well, but again, this will be sent to you as part of takeaways if you're interested. But you can set this up so that you have all these dashboards on certain on accounts and contacts or opportunities or whatever. You can use it for any object in Salesforce, and you can see at a glance, especially in the bottom here, what fields that you might be interested to have data in, and the color changes. Green means that you're there. Yellow means that you're almost there, and red obviously means that you have some work to do. So these data quality analysis dashboards are really a good tool for at least being able to assess your data quality in your organization. This is put out by Salesforce Labs as is, and the price is free. So now, obviously, there is a little bit of setup to do, and your Salesforce administrator can do that and set it up so that it meets the needs of your particular company. So those are two ways: the data cleanliness dashboards and reports, and then also the data quality analysis dashboards. Then, in addition to that, within Salesforce itself, you can set up required fields. And if I were to do that in just this field or this record alone, let's say that I don't know, I'm interested in the website. I want every account to have a website address. Then all I do is go into that field and make it required, so that in order to save that particular record, that field needs to be filled out with the red mark. It means it's required. So now the only drawback to having required fields is that you'll frustrate your end user, because what if they don't immediately have the website address? Then that prevents them from continuing on, which may impede user adoption somewhat. So you need to strategize about, okay, we're willing to have a little bit of leeway as far as certain fields go, but we definitely want these other fields in order to save a record. Sometimes you have incomplete addresses or whatever. And I'm going to show you how to do a mass update in just a sec on let's say one field. So enforcing data standards through required fields is another way of getting and maintaining good data. The other thing that you can do is to create what's called a validation rule. And validation rules are available for every object. So if I go into accounts and have a validation rule, it's fairly simple to set up. You just create the rule, make sure that it's active, that there's some kind of description, and then put the formula here, and then the error message whether you want it at the top of the page or at the field level, and if so, what field. So let's say that I wanted to enforce, um, let's say a, a, some kind of rule for the state and province. There's actually some good formulas if you go to this tab here, this link that will create a new tab, and it's got a bunch of um, sample validation rules. So here's one, sample account address validation rules. So I'm going to click on that. So here are some validation rules. Here's one for the US billing zip code. Let's say that you wanted to enforce a particular format in the zip code. You can enforce the 5 or the 5+4 billing zip code. And all you'd have to do is basically just copy that formula and stick it in. So we're going to go back here. We're actually not going to use the, there we go. So what this says then is that if the billing country is USA or the US, because we might have inconsistent data in that regard, then enforce the 5-digit or the 5-digit +4 on the billing postal code. That's the name of the field. So I'm going to put enforce zip code format as the rule name. Okay. And then the error message would read, please format, please use correct zip code format. And it's going to be on the zip code. And it's active. So if I go into accounts now, and if I go to any, and I go into edit, now you'll notice that there's no country here. But if there were, let's say that I had the wrong. First of all, the required field is going to make me put in something, which is okay. And I'll try to save that again. And then it gives me another error. It says, look below. It says, please use correct zip code format. So if a lot of times this happens just by mistyping, now you can save it. So what began as, a 4-digit zip code, because of the validation rule, enforced the creation of better data, good data for that. Okay, so required fields and validation rules, very helpful, and you can set those up. Your administrator can set them up for pretty much any field. You can also set up workflow rules that that can do what's called a field update. So let's say that I only had US in there. And I want consistency, so I want USA. Or the person had U dot, yeah, U dot S instead of US. What I could do is set up a workflow with a field update that said, okay, in the case when it's either US, U dot yes, or sorry, U dot S, and so forth, you can think of the different combinations, then replace the value in the billing country with USA. So it won't send an error message to the user. It'll just update that automatically. So that's one way of maintaining good data. You can do that on pretty much any field as well, just through workflow rules. Okay, so another way of maintaining good data strategy is to, first of all, have a data strategy. In other words, define and communicate your data standards to your users through some documentation. Now, documentation is great, but most people don't look at it. The only times that they do look at it is when they're forced to, usually at some kind of new employee orientation, or whether it's a specific meeting on data standards or data entry standards or whatever, or a training. So sometimes it's good to leverage the help text feature on fields. So, for example, in accounts, let's say on the website, please enter website in something like that. This is just for an example. So what happens is that once you put in a help text, there's a little icon with a question mark, and that will appear on the record. And it's helpful when you hover over it because it'll give information to the end user on what's expected for that particular field. Now, obviously, it looks like the system added the HTTP, so I don't really need that as part of that. So yeah, using the help text on custom fields or any fields to put explanations and expectations for individual field data entry right beside the field is important. Then there's no question, what a field means and what is expected as far as the entry of that data. In addition to having a data strategy, it's good to have some kind of steering committee. And there are those you'll identify as leaders in your organization. You'll identify what I call the data geeks. They're kind of sticklers for details, and they make the perfect data Nazi, if you will, um, and can help in enforcing the standards that your company has set up. And I'm going to show you a document. This is actually put out by Salesforce, and what I did in my organization was um, I used this. It's only like 2 pages long, and then I added what the U.S. Postal Service provides as far as um, guidelines for addresses and that kind of thing to it. And I made it available under the Documents tab in Salesforce, as well as in content. New employees would receive this and so forth. And that's just naming conventions. What is right? What are the best practices as far as data entry goes? Um, so before adding any customer name, make sure you search Salesforce to confirm that the record doesn't already exist. How many of you don't do that already? Um, so you should search several different ways using partial and creative spellings for the company name. And then it gives you general rules. No punctuation. This seems a little bit counterintuitive to how we're taught to do things in grammar school or high school or whatever. But in database management, no punctuation is best, simply because, let's say one person puts in I.B.M. Another person puts in IBM, and another person puts International Business Machines. So you've got 3 records there that are all the same record, are all the same company, but the system doesn't know that they're all the same company. But if you enforce the data standards, then that will cut down on the number of dupes that you create. No all caps unless an abbreviation such as IBM. So don't use all caps. Sometimes when you're importing data from another system, they might be in all caps. If you're using a spreadsheet, you can get away, you can do a mass update on that particular field and make it proper caps where it's just the first letter capitalized. No numbers unless it's part of a trademarked name. No a and the in the first word, and so forth. These are just very basic things that you can do, but it will save you a ton of time, a ton of money in the long run, and you'll be able to have better data. Here are some government rules. All U.S. state organizations under the 2 initials plus department, um, and so forth. And then abbreviations, still no punctuation. Don't use punctuation. So these are accepted abbreviations on here and what they mean. There's 2 columns here. And then I added U.S. Postal Service standardizations for addresses. And this goes into every particular instance, county, highway, etc. You've got 2-letter abbreviations and possession abbreviations for states and um, directions, cardinal directions, military states, and so forth. You've got street abbreviations, so alley, a bluff. All these have to use the common or the Postal Service standard. And then you've got, those are street abbreviations, quite a few of those. Secondary unit designators like floor, suite. A lot of times this is used commonly, but it's actually supposed to be STE, trailer, unit, and so forth. If you're interested, you can email the events at kyazmallc.com and we'll send those to you. Now, the last thing I want to show you is a really good tool to do mass updating. There are a number of tools available on the App Exchange. I alluded to a couple, data.com. There's mass delete, edit, and update buttons that you can download and use on any particular object. Things like dupe catcher, which is a free service for catching dupes in your organization. And also Strike Iron, which is an address verification app. What it does is it's a button that you push, and it will send a web service to the U.S. Postal Service and compare the address that you have on your record with what's available in the U.S. Postal Service, and you can update it that way, and it'll bring in some extra information, including congressional district and even geolocation codes, that kind of thing. It's actually quite a cool service. But there are other tools available for actually doing manual updating, and one's called the Excel connector. I'm going to show you how that can be used. So all the addresses in this particular database do not include the billing country. And what I want to do to have consistent data, because I just put in a validation rule that says if your billing country is US or USA, then you need to have this format for the zip code. So I want to be able to use that. Okay, and the way it starts off is it's just a basic three-step wizard. So where do you want to put the data? I want to put it in that, start with that field. So I'm going to do it on the account object. Do I want all of the fields? Yeah, sure, why not? I don't think there's that many. So I'll go ahead, I'll put the fields in, and then what I want is where the billing country is equal to nothing. So there's nothing in there. And then I'm going to run the query. And it'll bring in all the records. This ID record is really important because that's how the Excel connector tells Salesforce what to do. Okay, so we're going to update the billing country. Now, for the sake of expediency, I know that all of these are in the USA. So I put in the USA, and I'm going to go to the very bottom one. I think there's only 100 records or so. Oh, here's one from Singapore. Okay. So I'm going to go Shift and then click. And then I'm going to do Control D, which means fill in everything with USA all the way down. Now, I'm just going to do these ones because we're quickly running out of time, and I want to save some time for Q&A. So what I'm going to do is highlight these, and then I'm going to go up to the force.com connector, and I'm going to say update the selected cells. It's going to ask me, do you want to update these 96 records, account records? And I say, yep, I do, with USA. And then it'll go through, and if there's any errors, then it'll tell me what those things are with the colored, and it'll just say use correct. It's enforcing the validation rule here, so you can see that this one doesn't have. I know for a fact that New Hampshire begins with 0, and so does Massachusetts. So there's obviously something incorrect with how it was brought back from Salesforce, but that's okay. And same thing with these other ones. These begin with 0. So let's go back into Salesforce, and let's look up University of Arizona, for example. Uh, maybe that's not a good example. Hang on. And let's add to this the billing country. And you can see that all the billing countries for those records that I updated have been updated. Now, there were a lot that I didn't update, but you can see that it's a really good way of doing mass updates on a particular field to enforce uh, good good data. Okay, and you can do this on any field. You can slice and dice the spreadsheet up. You can sort it, and so on and so forth. So those are just a few ways of maintaining uh, good data practices.